Imagine you were born in a cramped, dimly lit room on the edge of London's East End. Sometime around 1820, the Industrial Revolution had already turned the city into a throbbing, smoke-choked machine of progress. Tall chimneys sprouted everywhere: factories, workshops, breweries, and houses all relied on coal fires, and coal meant soot. The soot piled in layers, clung to brickwork, and choked the sky until the sun was no more than a pale smudge above the rooftops. For adults, this soot was an inconvenience. For children like you, it was a destiny. You wouldn't have been born into wealth. No, your father may have been a laborer scraping together pennies for bread, or perhaps he disappeared altogether, leaving your mother to beg in alleyways with you on her hip. In this world, poverty had teeth and it bit hardest at children. Every breath you took was a gamble, not just against disease and hunger, but against the fate waiting for so many boys under 10, being sold, apprenticed, or simply handed over to a master sweep. The chimney sweep was a figure both despised and pitied. They were always dirty, their skin stained black with soot that water could never fully wash away. Their coughs were harsh and constant, the sound of lungs rasping under years of breathing coal dust. They smelled of ash and sweat, and their clothes were patched rags. Yet in a city where every household depended on fires, their trade was necessary. The chimney sweep kept the fires burning safely, scraping soot from the flues to prevent deadly blazes. And for this task they needed the smallest, most pliable bodice. They needed children. If your mother had too many mouths to feed and too little bread, she might have made a choice that would haunt her forever. A chimney master, a wiry man with black fingernails and a hard look in his eye, might arrive with a coin. He'd promise training, food, and lodging. He'd promise you a future. Desperation would tighten your mother's throat, and though her hands trembled as she signed you away, hunger won the battle. You would not understand what it meant. You were perhaps 6 years old, maybe younger. A master sweep didn't want strong boys. He wanted small ones, tiny enough to crawl inside flues no wider than 9 inches. He wanted a child who could twist and contort, who could climb with hands, knees, and elbows pressed to the walls, scraping as he went. You were perfect for the job, not because you were strong, but because you were weak. The master took you that very night. You didn't carry toys or clothes, only the rags on your back. Perhaps you cried, tugging at your mother's skirt, but she turned away, unable to watch. As you stumbled behind the sweep into the labyrinth of streets, your childhood ended. Your new home was a cellar or garret filled with other boys. Their faces were so black with soot they looked like shadows themselves. They slept in heaps, coughing through the night, scratching at sores on their skin. Some were missing teeth, others had burns on their arms or legs. When you curled up in a corner, clutching your knees, one boy whispered, "Don't cry." The chimneys don't care. You didn't understand then, but you soon would. The very next morning, you met your first chimney. It loomed above you like a monstrous tower, its mouth yawning wide with darkness. The master pushed a bundle of rods and brushes into your hands, though you were too small to carry them. He knelt beside you and rubbed soot on your face, muttering, "Get used to it. This is your skin now." You were taught the posture of a sweep, knees and elbows pressed outward, back hunched, head tilted so you could look upward. The soot rained down in clouds, stinging your eyes and sticking in your throat. You coughed until you thought you would choke, but the master only barked, "Keep going." Inside the flue there was no light, no air, only blackness so complete that it swallowed sound. You crawled upward inch by inch, scraping the soot with your brush, the rough brick tearing your skin. Your shirt snagged and ripped, your knees bled, your chest heaved for air. Sometimes the flue narrowed so tightly you could barely move. You panicked, kicking and clawing, your cries muffled by layers of soot. Outside, the master listened for the scrapes of your brush. If they stopped too long, he banged on the chimney with an iron rod, shouting, "Up you go, lad, or I'll light a fire under you." It was no idle threat. Many sweeps used fire to drive boys upward when they froze in terror. The heat rising from below was unbearable, and children scrambled for their lives, skin blistering, hair singeing. Some never made it out. You learned quickly. Your knees hardened with scabs, your elbows grew calloused, and your lungs burned every day. But the soot was relentless. It seeped into your pores, filled your eyes, blackened your spit. At night, when you lay on the straw pallet, you coughed until you retched, spitting up black phlegm that stained your blanket. The older boys said, "It never went away." "You'll cough till the day you die," one whispered. And that day'll come sooner than you think. And yet, in this darkness, there were moments of strange triumph. When you reached the top of a chimney and emerged into the smoky daylight, covered in soot from head to toe, you felt a kind of victory. You had conquered the tunnel of death. The city stretched before you, rooftops bristling with chimneys, each one a black throat waiting for another climb. You coughed, spat, and smiled. You had survived, at least for now. But survival came at a cost. You were no longer just a child. You were a chimney sweep, a creature of soot and smoke, born into shadows and bound to crawl through them until your body gave out. Life as a chimney sweep wasn't just about the climbs. It was about surviving the master, the workhouse rhythm, and the unspoken laws of boys who had already been broken in. From the very beginning, you learned that the master's word was iron. His rules governed whether you ate, whether you rested, and whether you endured another night without beatings. The master had no patience for hesitation. If you balked before a chimney, if you coughed too loudly, or if you cried for your mother in the night, you were punished. Punishment came in many forms: a beating with a cane, a boot across the ribs, or worse, starvation. A hungry boy climbed faster, he insisted. He'd throw a crust of stale bread to the ground, and watch as half a dozen children scrambled for it, their fingers clawing each other in desperation. But cruelty was not only in punishment, it was in training. The master kept a sack of encouragement tools, as he called them. Among them was a sharp-edged scraper used not for soot, but for boys who refused to climb. He would press the cold metal against your bare feet and say, "Up you go, or you'll learn pain." Another favorite was the brush handle, jabbed into the solace of boys who hesitated too long inside a flue. Every bruise and scar became part of your education. And yet in this hell there was something resembling family. The other boys, thin, hollow-eyed, their hair and skin caked in soot, were the only companions you had. They slept beside you, worked beside you, bled beside you. In the darkness of chimneys and in the choking coughs of night, you shared whispers. The youngest were always called climbing boys, though some were no more than toddlers. They looked up to the older ones with awe, for those who had survived past 12 were considered veterans. They were bent, scarred, and wheezing, but they carried themselves like survivors of a war. They passed down knowledge like sacred scripture: how to breathe shallowly to save air inside a flue, how to twist your body when the chimney narrowed, how to press your knees into corners to keep from sliding backward. There were other secrets, too. A boy named Thomas told you how to wet your lips with soot so they wouldn't crack in the heat. Another, called Sparrow for his light frame, showed you how to use your elbows like hooks when the walls became too smooth to grip. They were tricks of survival, passed from child to child because the master never cared to teach them. The only lessons he gave were through pain. At night, when the master's snores filled the cellar, you and the boys spoke of dreams. Some dreamed of running away, of vanishing into the countryside where chimneys did not exist. Others dreamed of riches, of becoming masters themselves one day, though everyone knew the soot killed most before they reached manhood. The boldest dreamers spoke of reformers, the rare men and women who tried to outlaw child sweeps. "There's a lord," Sparrow whispered once, "who says no child should go up a chimney. Says he'll fight for us in Parliament." His voice was filled with a hope that seemed too fragile for this world, but hope was dangerous. Hope made boys careless, and carelessness inside a chimney meant death. Death was never far away. You heard stories whispered in the cellar of boys who got stuck, their bodies wedged so tightly in the flues that no force could pull them free. Some suffocated in silence. Others screamed until their voices were smothered by soot. Their bodies were often left for hours until masons broke open the brickwork to retrieve them. Every boy knew someone who had vanished like that, swallowed by the city's endless hunger for clean chimneys. The older boys also warned of something called soot-wort. At first you laughed at the name, thinking it was just another cruel joke. But then you saw the truth, blackened lumps growing on the legs and scrotums of those who had been sweeping too long. Their groans at night were more terrifying than the master's punishments. The disease ate at them slowly, and no one survived it for long. You didn't know the word for it then, but history would call it the first industrial cancer. Still, you endured. Each morning began with the master's shout and the stench of stale ale on his breath. He dragged you from the straw pallet, shoved a brush into your hands, and pointed toward another chimney. Sometimes it was a narrow flue in a wealthy townhouse. Sometimes a factory stack so high you thought you'd never see daylight again. Your skin toughened, your cough deepened, and your soul grew heavy with soot. On Sundays, the only day with less work, the master marched you and the other boys through the streets, your faces black and clothes in tatters. People looked at you with disgust, sometimes tossing pennies, sometimes spitting. Children pointed and laughed, calling you climbing rats. You wanted to shout that you weren't an animal, that you were a boy like them, but the words stuck in your throat with the soot. There were rare moments of kindness. An old woman once pressed a hot roll into your hand when the master wasn't looking. A baker let you lick the crumbs from his counter. Sometimes when you climbed chimneys in wealthy homes, a maid would sneak you a cup of milk or a slice of fruit. These tiny mercies were lifelines, sparks of humanity in a world otherwise cloaked in ash, but they were fleeting. Always, the master's hand was waiting to snatch away any comfort. Always, the chimney loomed as your destiny. And so you learned the rules. Obey the master or suffer. Trust your fellow boys, for they were your only family. Never get stuck, never stop scraping, and never believe too deeply in dreams. Dreams, like soot, had a way of suffocating you. By the time you were 8 years old, your body no longer felt like your own. Your back had begun to curve, your knees were scarred, your lungs rattled with every breath, and yet you were alive. Alive in a world that cared nothing for you. Alive in a city where survival was victory. Alive, but already marked by shadows that would never leave. The first time you truly understood what it meant to be a chimney sweep was not during training, nor during the master's beatings, but the day you nearly suffocated inside a flue. Until then, you had thought yourself strong, or at least strong enough to endure. But strength meant nothing against the crushing darkness of brick and soot. It began on a bitter morning, frost whitening the cobblestones as the master dragged you and the others to a row of tall townhouses. The wealthy families within burned cold day and night, and their chimneys clogged quickly. The master pointed to one particularly narrow flue and jabbed his finger at you. Your turn, boy. Up you go. You pressed your hands to the cold bricks at the chimney's mouth. The flue gaped like a tunnel into hell. Already, soot crusted the entrance like black snow. You held your brush awkwardly, knees scraping as you crawled inside. The air changed immediately. Outside, the morning frost had stung your nose. Inside, there was nothing but dust and suffocating heat. The flue twisted upward, narrower than you expected, forcing your shoulders to hunch. You pressed your knees against the bricks, shuffled upward, and began scraping with the brush. Each stroke sent showers of soot cascading downward, coating your hair, your arms, your mouth. You coughed, but the sound seemed swallowed by the chimney itself. Up and up you climbed, your tiny body pressed against walls no wider than the width of your chest. The bricks tore at your elbows and thighs, grinding your skin raw. The soot became thicker with every stroke, clinging to your lashes until you could barely see. When you tried to suck in a breath, the air itself seemed to burn. Your lungs rasped, wheezing, as if the chimney wanted to drink the breath straight out of you. Halfway up, the flue narrowed further. You wriggled your shoulders, but the space tightened like a fist around your chest. Panic surged. You tried to move your arms, but they scraped uselessly against the bricks. The brush slipped from your hand, tumbling into the darkness below. For a moment you froze. You couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The blackness pressed against your eyes until you saw sparks of light dancing in your skull. Your heart hammered so loudly you thought the master might hear it outside. You wanted to scream, but the soot filled your mouth. Then, from below, came the banging of the master's rod against the bricks. Clang, clang, clang. His voice roared up the flue. "Move, boy, or I'll smoke you out." Terror gave you strength. You twisted your body, ramming your knees upward, clawing with your fingernails against the brick. Skin tore, blood mixed with soot, but slowly, painfully, your body shifted forward. With one final heave, your chest slid free of the chokehold, and you gasped like a drowning child breaking the surface of a river. You climbed on, wheezing, scraping, until finally a sliver of pale daylight shimmered above you. With a desperate push, you pulled yourself out onto the rooftop. Cold air blasted your face and you gulped it greedily, coughing black spit onto the tiles. Your arms trembled, your legs shook, and your vision blurred. But you were alive. The master didn't praise you when you clambered down. He only cuffed your ear and snarled. "Dropped the brush, did you? That'll come out of your supper." That was the chimney sweep's life. Death always an inch away. Survival rewarded with nothing but hunger. But even as you suffered, there was a strange rhythm to it all. Every chimney had its own character. Some were straight, smooth, almost kind. Others twisted like serpents, their walls slick with tar, trapping you in their coils. The worst were the flues of bakeries. The grease and soot clung together in sticky layers, and when you scraped them, they fell in heavy clumps that nearly smothered you. The smell of burnt fat and smoke clung to your skin for days. There were times when the master did indeed smoke you out. He would light straw at the base of a chimney to drive boys upward faster. The fire hissed and roared below, heat licking at your feet, smoke clawing at your throat. You scrambled like a rat fleeing a flood, your eyes watering, your skin blistering. If you climbed fast enough, you survived. If you hesitated, well, every boy knew at least one name that had ended in ashes. Among the climbing boys, there were stories whispered when the master was asleep. Stories of haunted chimneys where children had died, their cries still echoing in the bricks. Sparrow once swore he had heard laughter above him in a flue, though no one else was there. Thomas claimed a chimney in Holborn had swallowed his friend whole, the boy's body never found. Whether these tales were true or not, every child believed them. After all, weren't the chimneys themselves monsters? Black, hungry throats that devoured children and spat out only smoke? Your body bore the marks of the work. Your knees grew bald and leathery, your spine hunched from constant crawling, your skin forever dusted with soot. The older boys laughed bitterly when they looked at themselves in puddles. "We're not boys anymore," one said, his teeth gleaming white against his blackened face. "We're shadows." But sometimes you caught glimpses of the sky that reminded you of what it meant to be human. Standing atop a rooftop after a climb, the wind in your hair, you could see the city spread before you like a sea of smoke and stone. The Thames curled through the middle, ships crawling along its surface. Beyond the chimneys, beyond the soot, there were trees, fields, places untouched by coal and fire. For a brief moment, standing in the sunlight, you almost believed there could be life beyond the shadows. And yet, when you climbed back down, the master was waiting, rod in hand, eyes sharp as nails. There was no escape, no mercy, no hope. You belonged to the chimneys now, body and soul. Every day was a gamble between life and death. Every climb was a negotiation with darkness. And every breath you drew carried the taste of soot, a reminder that one day, the chimney would win. If summer was cruel, winter was merciless. When the frost swept over London and the Thames stiffened into slabs of ice, the chimneys never rested. Families, terrified of the cold, burned coal day and night, stuffing their grates with fuel until the flames roared. For climbing boys, this meant endless work. The more fires, the more soot. The more soot, the more climbs. You woke in the cellar shivering so violently that your teeth ached. The thin rags you wore did nothing against the icy draft seeping through cracks in the walls. The master barked at you and the others to move faster, his breath clouding the air. Outside, the streets were slick with frost, horses' hooves clattering as they dragged carts through slush. The master's boots crunched in the snow, but your bare feet, toughened from years of climbing, pressed into the ice until they went numb. Some boys wrapped their toes with scraps of cloth, but they still bled when the frost cracked their skin. The chimneys themselves seemed to mock you in winter. They grew hotter, their walls blazing with the constant burn of fires. You crawled inside and felt your flesh sting as if pressed to a forge. The contrast was maddening, frozen to the bone outside, scorched raw inside. You never knew which was worse, the bitter cold that stiffened your fingers or the searing heat that roasted them. At night, when you returned to the cellar, the coughing was worse. The cold tightened your lungs and every breath rattled with soot. Sparrow once coughed so hard that blood stained his blanket. The master ignored it. To him, coughing was just the music of the trade. Society saw you but did not see you. People passed you on the streets and turned their noses at your smell. Some muttered curses, calling sweeps filthy beggars or chimney rats. Yet those same people lit fires in their hearths, enjoying the warmth that only your broken body had made possible. The hypocrisy was invisible to them. To you, it was as clear as the soot on your skin. There were parades sometimes, grand spectacles where the wealthy promenaded through London, their carriages gleaming, their coats trimmed with fur. You and the other boys would watch from the gutters, soot-streaked faces turned toward silks and jewels. For a moment, you felt the full weight of your station, not just poor, not just hungry, but invisible. A creature of shadow, a necessary nuisance, a child stripped of childhood. And yet, despite society's disdain, there were moments when sweeps were oddly celebrated. On May Day, a strange tradition lifted your life from despair into a brief spectacle. Sweeps would dress in garish costumes, decorating themselves with ribbons, flowers, and bright paper. They paraded through the streets, dancing and clapping, pretending at joy. Passers-by tossed coins, some out of amusement, others out of pity. The boys laughed and sang, but the joy was thin, forced. Beneath the flowers and ribbons, their skin was still blackened, their lungs still rotting. It was a masquerade, one day of color in a year of soot, but winter stripped even that away. Winter was survival. You learned tricks to keep moving, blowing into your hands, rubbing your arms until the skin burned, huddling against other boys for warmth. The master offered no blankets, no fire. Why waste fuel on children, he said, when chimneys needed it more. The churches sometimes preached charity. Priests would speak of the plight of the poor, urging the wealthy to give. On rare days, you might receive a crust of bread from a kind parishioner, but the sermons never mentioned sweeps directly. It was as if society had decided you were too dirty, too tainted to be redeemed by God. You began to wonder if heaven itself would turn away a soot-stained boy. The worst nights were when snow fell. The city blanketed in white looked almost beautiful, but for you it meant misery. Snow melted against your skin, soaking your rags until you shivered uncontrollably. Climbing became dangerous, the rooftops slick with ice. Many boys fell. Some broke bones, others cracked their skulls against the cobblestones. Those who survived were rarely treated properly. A broken leg was a death sentence in disguise because a sweep who couldn't climb was useless. Masters abandoned them, leaving them to beg or starve, and still society looked away. They wanted their chimneys swept, their fires safe, their parlors warm, but they did not want to see the blackened children who made it possible. You were both essential and disposable, a paradox only the wealthy could afford. There were whispers, however, of people who cared. Men like Jonas Hanway and Lord Shaftesbury, reformers who spoke against the cruelty of sending children up chimneys. Their words echoed faintly through the city, carried in newspapers you could not read. Some masters cursed them, calling them meddling fools. Some boys clung to their names like talismans. "They'll save us one day," Sparrow whispered once, his voice raspy from coughing. But years passed and nothing changed. You began to understand a bitter truth. Society moved slowly and children died quickly. The physical toll deepened with each passing winter. Your spine bent further, your knees swelled with sores, and your breathing became labored. When you coughed, black specks of soot dotted your palms. You learned to hide them from the master, fearing he would decide you were no longer worth feeding. The older boys said the soot was inside you now, a permanent part of your body. "We're not made of flesh anymore," one muttered. "We're made of smoke." And perhaps they were right. For what else could explain the way your skin never came clean, no matter how hard you scrubbed? What else could explain the way your dreams filled with choking darkness, as though the chimneys themselves followed you into sleep? Winter blurred the line between life and death. Each climb was harder than the last, each breath more ragged. And all the while, the city roared on around you, indifferent. The factories belched more smoke, the carriages rattled, the wealthy dined in warm rooms by roaring fires. The world had no time to mourn a chimney boy. If you died, you would be buried quickly, perhaps in a pauper's grave, perhaps not at all. The master would shrug, curse his lost investment, and find another child to replace you. Life went on. London went on, and you became nothing more than another shadow swallowed by the smoke. In a world that gave you nothing but soot and hunger, the only thing left was each other. The climbing boys, though beaten, broken, and starved, built a kind of brotherhood fragile, secret, and necessary. Without it, the work would have devoured you long before the chimneys did. The master thought of you as tools. To him, you were no more than brushes with lungs. He fed you just enough to keep you climbing, punished you when you faltered, and discarded you when you broke. But the boys knew better. You were not tools. You were not rats. You were children bound together by pain. And in that bond, you carved out scraps of humanity where the master had none. The first lessons you learned did not come from him. They came from the older boys. Breathe shallow, Thomas told you, his voice hoarse. Don't suck in the soot, or it'll choke you. Sparrow showed you how to tuck your shirt under your knees so the brick wouldn't deflay your skin too badly. Another boy, called Red because of the scars on his arms, taught you how to wriggle through narrow bends by twisting your shoulders first, then your hips. The chimney's like a snake, he said. You gotta slide like one. These were not things the master cared to teach. He only knew how to beat you upward. But the boys taught out of necessity. A boy who learned was a boy who survived, and a boy who survived meant another ally in the cellar at night. At night, when the work was done and the master's snores rattled the floorboards above, the cellar transformed. By day it was a dungeon, by night it was a gathering place. The boys huddled together on straw pallets, their voices low, spinning stories to ward off the dark. Some of the stories were warnings, tales of boys who got stuck, their cries fading into silence as the soot smothered them. Others were ghost stories, born from soot-filled imaginations. Sparrow swore he once saw a pale face inside a flue, watching him from the darkness. Red claimed chimneys that had taken too many children were cursed, and that their bricks carried whispers. You didn't know whether to believe them, but in the flicker of a candle stub, with shadows dancing across the cellar walls, the stories felt real. There were games too, crude inventions played with scraps. A broken brush handle became a sword. Pebbles stolen from the street became dice. Sometimes the boys dared each other to see who could hold their breath the longest, as though preparing for the suffocating blackness of the chimneys. Even laughter, though rare, could be found in those moments. It sounded strange in your throat, like something forgotten, but it reminded you that you were still alive. Songs echoed in the cellar as well-ragged, broken songs that stitched you together. Some were body tunes learned from drunken workmen in the streets, others simple rhymes passed down from sweep to sweep. One of the most common was the bitter chant. We climb, we scrape, we bleed, we fall. The chimney takes the best of all. You sang it not because it was cheerful, but because it belonged to you. It was your anthem, your identity, carved in soot. And with this fragile brotherhood came rivalries too. Food was scarce, and a crust of bread could spark a fight. The stronger boys sometimes stole from the weaker, snatching away potatoes or scraps of meat. But even these fights had rules, unspoken yet understood. No one drew blood unless desperate. Blood meant weakness, and weakness meant death. Despite the rivalries, there was loyalty. When one boy fell sick with fever, the others covered for him, climbing his share of chimneys to keep the master from noticing. When a boy wept in the night, homesick and afraid, another would press a hand to his shoulder, whispering, "Quiet now. You're not alone." And sometimes, though rarely, the brotherhood extended beyond your own cellar. You'd meet other sweeps on the rooftops, boys from different masters, their faces just as black, their eyes just as hollow. From across the tiles, you'd nod at each other, a silent greeting between shadows. Occasionally, if the master wasn't watching, you might exchange words. "How many climbs today?" one would ask. "Too many," you'd answer. Then both of you would laugh, though nothing was funny. There were rival gangs of sweeps too, boys who fought each other for territory, for the favor of masters, or simply out of desperation. But more often than not, sweeps recognized each other as kin. The rivalry was less about hate and more about survival, a game played in soot where the stakes were bread and breath. And within this fragile network, dreams survived. Sparrow dreamed of becoming a sailor, escaping London's smoke for the wide sea. Red said he would one day own a farm where the only climbing he'd ever do was up an apple tree. Thomas wanted to learn letters, to read and write, to hold a book instead of a brush. They spoke of these dreams softly, as though afraid the master or the chimneys themselves might hear and snuff them out. You didn't know what you dreamed of. Sometimes you dreamed of a bed with clean sheets. Sometimes of your mother's voice, though the memory of it was fading. Sometimes simply of breathing without coughing. The Brotherhood kept those dreams alive, fragile though they were. Without it, you would have been only soot and skin, another shadow crawling through brick. With it, you were at least a voice card, coughing, half-starved, but still human. But Brotherhood had limits. It could not stop the Master's blows. It could not heal the burns on your skin. It could not bring back the boys who never returned from a climb. And as much as you clung to each other, you knew the truth. One day, the chimney would claim you just as it claimed them. Still, until that day came, you had each other. And in a world of shadows, that was something. The chimney was not just brick and soot, it was alive. It groaned, scraped, clawed, and sometimes swallowed you whole. Every climb was a battle, not only with smoke and darkness, but with dangers that seemed to crawl from the stones themselves. The first enemy was the soot. It filled the air like a black storm, choking you with every breath. You tried to hold your mouth shut, but lungs demanded air, and when you gasped, it rushed in like poison. Coughs racked your chest, sharp and painful, spraying black phlegm. Sometimes you coughed so hard you thought your ribs would crack, and deep inside, the soot laid its curse scarring your lungs, making each climb harder than the last. The second enemy was the heat. Some chimneys were still warm from the fires below. The brick seared your skin, blistering your arms and legs. The older boys told stories of masters too impatient to let a fire die down, forcing children up while embers still glowed. The unlucky ones came down screaming, their flesh burned raw. Others didn't come down at all. You prayed each time that your chimney would be cool, but prayers rarely mattered in London. The third enemy was the tightness. Chimneys narrowed without warning, pressing your ribs and shoulders until you could barely breathe. You'd squirm and twist, scraping skin against brick, feeling it tear. Sometimes you wedged yourself in so tight that panic exploded in your chest. You could hear your heart hammering, your breath rasping against stone. The darkness mocked you. What if you never get free? What if this is where you die, alone in the black, your body found days later, stiff with soot? And sometimes boys did die that way. The older sweeps called it stuck fast. A chimney might pinch you by the shoulders or hips, holding you as though the house itself wanted to keep you. If another boy was sent up to pull you free, he risked the same fate. If ropes were tied to drag you down, they might break your bones. Sometimes even masters gave up, bricking over the flue to hide the body, letting the house keep its grim secret forever. The fourth enemy was collapse. Some chimneys were old, their bricks crumbling, mortar loose. You climbed carefully and suddenly the wall gave way. A brick crashed onto your head, splitting your scalp. Dust and debris rained into your mouth and eyes. Worse, the collapse could trap you under rubble, a coffin of stone. You'd scream, but the house muffled the sound, and the master would curse at the delay rather than dig for you. And then there were the creatures. Chimneys were homes not only to smoke, but to rats, spiders, and sometimes birds nesting in the flues. The rats were the worst. Their red eyes glimmered in the dark, and they bit without hesitation. You could feel sharp teeth pierce your ankles as you climbed, leaving trails of blood down your legs. You flailed, but there was nowhere to run. You had to keep climbing while they feasted. Some boys lost toes to rat bites that festered into infection. Some lost their lives. Falling was another terror. A chimney might stretch 30, 40 feet, twisting like a cruel maze. One slip, one misplaced knee, and you were plummeting down, your body smashing against the brick as you tumbled. Survivors carried crooked arms, shattered legs, and skulls cracked so badly their minds never healed. The unlucky were carried to paupers' graves before they even had time to grow tall. And yet the work demanded speed. The master barked at you to climb faster, to scrub harder. "Linger and you'll taste the cane," he growled. So you scrambled, reckless, even when your body screamed to stop. Bruises darkened your limbs, blisters burst into open sores, and burns wept with pus. Still, up you went. There was no choice. Every boy carried scars, trophies of survival, though they felt more like curses. Some limped from broken bones that healed crooked. Others had hands stiff with burns, fingers bent like claws. Many bore deep scratches down their backs where the bricks had sliced them open. And all of you carried the cough, that endless black cough, the one that rattled in your lungs even in sleep. It was the sound of your body filling with soot, a warning bell of a life cut short. The worst fate whispered among sweeps was the soot wart. It was a cancer, though none of you knew the word. A hard lump would grow between the thighs or under the arms, where soot clung longest to sweaty skin. At first it itched, then it burned. Then it ate through flesh, rotting you alive. The older sweeps limped with these wounds, stinking of decay, their bodies eaten by the very soot they scraped away for others. You looked at them and knew that would be you if you lived long enough. Despite all this, the master never stopped. He carried switches, canes, even hot pokers to jab at boys who slowed. One master was rumored to light straw beneath a chimney when a boy refused to climb, forcing him upward through smoke and flame. Whether true or not, the story spread, and the terror of it was enough to make you obey. Sometimes the dangers came not from the chimneys themselves, but from outside. Angry householders cursed the sight of filthy children on their rooftops. Dogs snapped at your heels as you walked the streets. Passers-by shoved you aside, muttering, "Chimney vermin." You were invisible until needed, and despised when seen. And yet, every morning, you rose again. The whip cracked, the soot clung, and you climbed, for bread, for breath, for survival. Because if you refused, there was nothing waiting for you. But hunger and hunger killed slower, but just as surely as the chimneys. Life as a chimney sweep did not pause when the climbing ended. The danger of the flues was only half the story. The other half unfolded in the streets, in the cellar, and in the quiet moments when survival was a fragile thread you held between your soot-stained fingers. Food was meager, a cruel echo of nourishment rather than the real thing. Breakfast, if you could call it that, was usually stale bread hard as stone, rough enough to scrape the inside of your mouth. Sometimes, if the master felt generous or wanted the boys to climb faster, he allowed a splash of milk, already souring. On rare days, a scrap of cheese, sharp and crumbling, found its way onto the table. You ate it in silence because to chew was to waste time, and time was never yours. Dinner was worse. Often it was nothing more than boiled potatoes, watery broth, or crusts scavenged from the master's own plate. Some boys stole when they could, slipping apples from market stalls, sneaking fish bones from garbage heaps. If caught, the punishment was swift a beating, a night without food, sometimes worse. Yet hunger pushed you to risk it again and again. Hunger had no patience for fear. The body, fed on scraps, grew twisted. Chimney sweeps were small, thin, and stunted, their growth stifled by labor and malnutrition. Muscles hardened in strange ways from climbing, shoulders curved inward, knees and elbows perpetually scraped raw. You might be 12, but your body looked 9, your eyes old with exhaustion. Passers-by would glance at you and wonder if you were half-starved, half-child, or half-ghost. In truth, you were all three. Sleep came in the cellar, if it came at all. The room was dark, damp, and alive with rats. Straw pallets served as beds, though the straw was often moldy, crawling with lice and fleas. The smell was a mixture of sweat, soot, and damp eartha stench that clung to your skin no matter how much you scratched. Some nights, exhaustion pulled you into sleep immediately, your body collapsing like a rag doll. Other nights, coughs rattled through the cellar, one boy after another, until the room sounded like a plague ward. Morning arrived with the master's shout or the crack of a stick against the floorboards. You rose stiff, bruised, hungry, and coughing, but rose nonetheless. The world offered no mercy. Clothes were no protection. Sweeps wore rags-thin shirts, torn trousers, sometimes nothing but a sack tied at the waist. Shoes were rare luxuries. Most boys climbed barefoot, their toes blackened and scarred, hardened against brick and stone. winter was the cruelest enemy. Frost bit into your fingers and toes as you clutched the cold chimneys, your breath freezing into white plumes. Many boys lost toes to frostbite, the black stumps reminding everyone else of the price of survival. Bathing was a myth. The soot clung to your skin like a second body, staining everything it touched. Water was scarce and soap scarcer still. Some masters forced boys to wash in rivers or troughs, but even then, the soot never truly left. It seeped into your pores, settled into the lines of your face, turned your hair permanently gray with filth. Strangers who saw you in the street knew instantly what you were. You carried the mark of your trade everywhere you went. And yet, scraps of childhood found their way through the cracks. On Sundays, if the master allowed rest, boys gathered in alleys to kick balls made of rags, to chase each other through streets, to forget just for a few hours that their lungs rattled and their backs ached. Laughter, rare but precious, echoed between brick walls. For that brief time, you were not vermin, not soot creatures, but simply children. There were other escapes too. Some boys carved little figures from wood or bone, carrying them as talismans. Others collected shiny buttons, pebbles, or bits of colored glass small treasures hidden under straw pallets. Sparrow liked to hum when he worked, the faint tune following him into the chimneys. Red had a knack for telling wild stories, weaving them so vividly that you almost believed them, tales of pirates, castles, and distant lands where chimneys did not exist. These scraps of imagination were as vital as bread. Without them, the darkness would have swallowed you whole. The streets of London became another kind of home. You learned their rhythm, the cries of market sellers, the rumble of carriages, the stench of open sewers. You knew which alleys offered hiding places, which taverns threw out the best scraps, which corners were safe to rest without being kicked awake. To the fine folk, you were invisible, just another dirty shadow. To yourself, the city was a map of survival, every turn a calculation. Illness was constant, the cough, the wheeze, the fever. Cuts that festered, eyes that swelled from smoke. Some boys shook with ague in the cellar, sweating through rags, only to be forced up chimneys the next morning. There was no doctor, no mercy. The master would mutter that a dead boy cost too much to feed anyway, and the work would continue without pause. You learned quickly not to complain. Complaints meant beatings, or worse being cast out, left to starve on the streets alone. And yet, in this grim existence, the sweeps built rituals of their own. Before a climb, some boys spat on their palms for luck. Others whispered the names of lost friends, as if calling on their spirits to guide them. You found yourself tapping the chimney wall 3 times before entering, a habit that made no sense but comforted you. Rituals did not change fate, but they gave you the illusion of control, and sometimes illusion was enough to keep climbing. The scraps of life were not much, but they were everything. A bite of stolen fruit, a moment of laughter in the cellar, a button kept like treasure, a song hummed against the roar of coughing. These scraps stitched your days together, fragile threads against the weight of misery. You lived not because life was kind, but because even the smallest scrap of it was worth clinging to. The life of a chimney sweep was filled with misery, but to the world outside, you carried a strange kind of magic. People who spat at you in the street one moment might reach to touch your filthy arm the next, whispering that it would bring them luck. In a city that believed in omens, curses, and charms, chimney sweeps were both vermin and talisman symbols of death and fortune at once. It began with fire. Fire was both master and monster in the 19th century. A warm hearth meant survival through bitter winters, but a stray ember could devour a whole row of houses. Chimneys, clogged with soot, were ticking bombs. The sweep, crawling inside those flues, became a figure of uneasy reverence. You were the one who kept fire in check, who allowed the city to sleep without fear of sudden flames. People hated the sight of you, but they feared what would happen without you even more. Superstitions grew from that fear. Housewives swore that if a sweep sneezed on you, you'd have good fortune for a week. Brides were told to invite a sweep to their wedding day, believing that his sooty touch would bless the marriage with prosperity. In some places, children ran after sweeps in the street, not to mock, but to rub your blackened hands for luck. For a moment, your filth was gold. Yet luck was only half the tale. Behind the superstition lurked darker whispers. People said sweeps were half-spirits themselves, born of smoke and soot, belonging more to shadow than flesh. Some believed you carried curses, that a house where a sweep died in the chimney would never be safe again. Others muttered that sweeps could see ghosts, that the soot on your skin let you slip between the world of the living and the dead. Among the sweeps themselves, superstition ran deeper still. In the cellar, boys traded stories not only of ghosts but of omens. Sparrow swore that if a chimney hissed like a snake as you entered, you'd best climb slow, for death was waiting at the top. Red believed the first scrape of soot that fell on your head each morning was a sign. The bigger the clump, the worse the day ahead. Thomas kept a pebble in his pocket, rubbed smooth from years of climbing. He called it his chimney stone and swore it had saved him from being stuck fast more than once. Your own rituals grew from fear. Before every climb, you tapped the bricks 3 times. You didn't know why, but the habit felt protective, like knocking on wood. Other boys spat into the hearth for luck before starting. Some whispered a rhyme under their breath, half prayer, half charm. Brick and soot, let me through, leave me whole, black, not blue. The master laughed at these habits, calling them nonsense. But he didn't climb the chimneys. You did, and in the pitch-dark shafts where the air was poison and the walls pressed close, belief was often the only thing standing between panic and survival. London itself wrapped sweeps in superstition. In taverns, old women muttered that sweeps carried the souls of the dead children they replaced. In alleys, beggars swore they'd seen soot-stained figures vanish into walls. In churches, some priests warned that sweeps were paying for the sins of the city, climbing into smoke as penance for others' comfort. And yet, on New Year's Day, those same priests welcomed sweeps to their steps, eager to touch your blackened hands for luck in the year ahead. The contradiction was dizzying. You were cursed and blessed, hated and revered. Children threw stones at you in alleys, but brides prayed you would appear on their wedding morning. Gentlemen scowled at you in the street, but secretly tugged your sleeve when no one was looking, begging for a blessing. You lived at the edge of society, never inside, never free, but always there, a shadow that haunted brick and fire. Even the masters fed on superstition. Some claimed their boys could smell fire before it started, like hounds on a hunt. Others boasted that their sweeps never died in chimneys because they were favored by fortune. These lies attracted customers eager for luck along with clean flues. And so the masters profited not only from your labor, but from the strange mystique that clung to your suffering. But perhaps the strangest superstition of all was hope. Among sweeps, there was a quiet belief that if you survived long enough, the soot itself might spare you. That it marked you not only with filth, but with resilience. The chimney keeps its own, Red once whispered. If it doesn't kill you, it keeps you alive. You clung to that thought on the darkest climbs, when the walls pressed too close and your chest screamed for air. Maybe, just maybe, you were one of the spared. And yet, you knew better. For every sweep who lived, another fell. The luck people craved from your filthy touch was never yours. It belonged to them, not to you. You were the giver of fortune, but never its keeper. Still, when a bride leaned from her carriage to kiss your soot-blackened cheek, when a housewife pressed a coin into your palm for luck, when a child ran after you with wide-eyed wonder, you let yourself believe, if only for a moment, that the soot carried more than misery, that maybe, just maybe, it carried a fragment of grace. London bustled around you carts clattering over cobblestones, hawkers shouting their wares, the smell of horse dung mingling with roasting chestnuts. Yet, amid the noise, you were invisible. The world saw chimney sweeps every day, but it refused to look. To most, you were part of the city's filth, a walking shadow that scurried from rooftop to cellar. When people did see you, they saw only extremes. You were either vermin or charm. A gentleman might wrinkle his nose, muttering that children like you lowered the dignity of the streets. A lady might tug her skirts away as you passed, as though soot were disease. And yet, that same lady might reach to touch your sleeve, whispering that she needed luck for her household. You were both despised and desired, cast out yet summoned when superstition called. The law itself seemed blind. England prided itself on progress on railways, factories, and empire, but it turned away from the children crawling through its chimneys. Parliament debated taxes, trade, and colonies, while boys suffocated in flues not 50 yards from Westminster's doors. Occasionally, a lord or philanthropist raised his voice. Should children climb chimneys at all? But most shrugged. Fires had to be cleaned. Chimneys had to be swept. And boys, after all, were small enough to fit. The newspapers carried stories now and then, tragic reports of a child stuck fast, his body found days later, twisted in soot. The public shuddered, then turned the page. Misery was as common in London as fog. It was easier not to dwell on shadows. And yet, not everyone looked away. A few reformers, horrified by what they saw, began to shout louder. They described the burns, the broken bones, the slow deaths from soot disease. They called chimney sweeping by children a national shame. But reform was a stubborn fire. Laws were passed to forbid child sweeps, then ignored. Masters bribed inspectors, households turned a blind eye, and children still climbed. The city whispered sympathy, but Smoke still needed somewhere to go. On the streets, your life was a contradiction. Children from better families crossed the road to avoid you, sneering at your rags. Yet beggars sometimes treated you as kin, sharing scraps of bread, knowing your hunger matched theirs. Shopkeepers shooed you from their doors, fearful your soot would cling to their goods. But in taverns, drunken men clapped you on the back, laughing at the thought of a child doing the work of fire itself. Some called you climbing boys, a phrase that almost sounded playful, as though the work were a game. Others called you black devils or soot monkeys. Rarely did anyone call you what you were, children. That word seemed reserved for those with clean faces and safe homes. And yet, amid the cruelty, there were flickers of kindness. An old woman might press a potato into your hand, whispering, "Eat, lad." A market seller might let you steal without shouting, turning his head the other way. A stranger might ruffle your filthy hair and mutter, "Poor soul," before hurrying on. These small mercies glowed in memory, warmer than the fires you cleaned. But society's kindness was never enough. The master still owned your days, the chimney still demanded your breath, and hunger still clawed at your belly. No bride's kiss, no lucky touch, no whispered pity could erase the bruises on your back or the cough rattling in your chest. The contradiction gnawed at you. How could they call you lucky when luck never touched your own life? How could they touch your hand for fortune, then recoil in disgust? How could lawmakers write words on paper while boys died in silence? The truth was simple, though cruel. Society needed you, but it did not want you. It wanted clean chimneys, warm hearths, safe homes. It wanted good fortune, good marriages, protection from fire. And to have those things, it was willing to sacrifice children like you, to bury you in soot and shadows. Sometimes when you climbed high enough, you looked out over the rooftops and wondered what it would be like to walk among those who ignored you, to wear clean clothes, to eat full meals, to live without smoke in your lungs. From above, London looked like a city of promised domes and spires rising, streets stretching endless. But you knew the truth. Beneath those spires, children were dying in brick coffins. And the city carried on blind. Still, the whispers of reform grew louder with each year. Pamphlets circulated, speeches echoed, some masters even replaced climbing boys with long brushes. Change was coming, but slow, always too slow for the boys still crawling through soot. For you, the reformers' promises were distant thunder, while the master's cane and the chimney's choke were storms of today. And so you lived in the contradiction. You were invisible until someone wanted your luck. You were cursed until someone needed their chimney cleared. You were a child until someone decided you were expendable. Society walked past you every day, blind and comfortable, while you carried its fire in your lungs. There were rare moments when the weight of soot lifted and the city became a place of fragile wonder rather than endless misery. These moments came on rooftops where the smoke thinned and the wind, sharp and cold, carried a taste of freedom. For a sweep, the roof was both escape and peril, a narrow line between exhilaration and death. Climbing above the chimneys, you saw London differently. The streets, crowded and chaotic from below, seemed almost small, toy-like. Smoke twisted in graceful spirals over slate roofs. Church steeples rose like needles into the foggy sky. From this height, the city was not a trap of soot and hunger, but a strange landscape of possibility. For a brief moment, you could forget the beaten arms, the coughing lungs, the danger lurking in every flue. Boys moved across rooftops with a secret grace, balancing along slanted tiles, leaping small gaps like acrobats. Every step was a gamble. One slip could send you tumbling dozens of feet onto the cobblestones below. Yet despite the peril, the thrill was intoxicating. For a few stolen minutes, you could pretend you were not a climbing boy, but something lighter, something free. Some rooftops became refuges. You and the other boys would lie flat against the tiles, letting the wind whip soot from your hair, listening to the city hum below. Sparrow liked to point out distant landmarks, pretending he could navigate to the river without touching a single street. Red would whistle a high, trembling tune as though defying the darkness that awaited him in the cellars. Thomas, always the quietest, watched the sky, eyes reflecting clouds and smoke, dreaming of letters and books that might one day carry him away. And yet, freedom was fragile. The master's shadow loomed even on the rooftops. A sudden shout, the crack of a stick against wood, could send boys scattering. Climbing down hastily, you returned to the soot and pain below, but those few minutes of wind and height remained etched in memory. They were proof that life could exist beyond brick and smoke, proof that you could be more than blackened skin and cough. Sometimes boys tried to extend that freedom. Sparrow once attempted to slip from rooftop to rooftop across half a street, imagining the thrill of a brief life unclaimed by masters. His foot slipped, sending him scraping along tiles, narrowly missing a fall that would have killed him. Red clutched him, and together they limped back to the cellar, breathless, hearts pounding. The story became legend among the boys, a tale of daring, danger, and the thin line between life and death. Freedom also came in other small ways. A stolen loaf of bread shared atop a roof, a conversation with a street urchin about the world beyond London, a glimpse of children playing in gardens far below, laughing without fear of soot or master. These glimpses, brief and stolen, were nourishment for the spirit. They reminded boys that life existed outside the shadow of the chimney, though the city often refused to grant it to them. Yet, even on the rooftops, danger followed. Slate tiles were slick with rain. Chimney pots wobbled, ready to topple. A bird startled, flapping its wings and knocking a boy off balance. Rats sometimes scuttled along the edges, spurred by hunger or fear. And always, the chimney waited below, black and unyielding, ready to reclaim you. Still, boys took risks for those moments. The city above soot and smoke offered perspective, tiny as it was. You saw the possibility of escape, even if it was impossible. You imagined slipping from London, running across fields and rivers, breathing clean air. In the imagination, you were free. In reality, you returned to your pallet of straw, bruised and exhausted, soot embedded in skin and hair. The rooftops also brought camaraderie. On the tiles, there was no master, no whip, no rage, just boys, together, balancing on the edge of danger. Stories flowed freely, laughter bubbled despite coughs and bruises. For brief moments, you were not climbing boys, but brothers, peers, adventurers in a city that never truly welcomed you. These moments strengthened bonds that would carry you through the cellar-esque darkness and the chimney-esque choke. And sometimes they brought sorrow. One boy, eager for freedom, misjudged a leap. He fell from the rooftop, smashing against brick and stone, never rising again. The others watched in horror, silent, knowing that his death was both chance and consequence. It became a cautionary tale, whispered in the cellar, a grim reminder that freedom was beautiful but deadly. The rooftop moments also revealed the beauty London often hid, the curve of the river, the sweep of fog over distant hills, the faint glimmer of sunlight breaking through smoke. For a child trapped in soot, these sights were treasures. They reminded you that life existed beyond the blackened flues, that the city held wonders even if society had no place for you. And so, you treasured every moment you could steal. Every breath above smoke, every glimpse of sky, every heartbeat that reminded you you were alive. The chimneys would always demand your return, the master would always punish, and the streets would always judge. But for a few fleeting minutes, freedom touched you, and you remembered what it was to be a child, not a climbing boy. Those stolen minutes became stories told in the cellar at night, They were whispered encouragements for boys about to climb, legends of wind, height, and possibility. And though the city remained blind, though the chimneys remained deadly, the rooftops reminded you that you were more than soot. You were alive, if only briefly, and that was a miracle in itself. Every climb was a trial, but every misstep carried consequences far beyond soot-stained lungs and raw skin. The master ruled with a cruel hand, and discipline was not just correction, it was terror. Punishments were designed to remind you that your body belonged not to yourself, but to the master, to the chimney, to the city that needed its flues cleaned. A whip across your back was common, the cane snapping against skin with sharp precision. Sometimes the master struck so hard that you felt the blow echo in your chest. Bruises blossomed like dark flowers, some fading, some lingering for weeks. You learned quickly to climb faster, scrub harder, and never falter, for hesitation was met with pain. Beatings were not always public. Some masters preferred humiliation. You might be stripped to the waist in the cellar, forced to stand while the older boys jeered, your body trembling from cold and fear. Others tied children to hooks or posts, leaving them there for hours as punishment. Hunger often accompanied these tortures. You felt the gnawing ache of your stomach as the Master-S rage was satisfied by your suffering. Illness could also become punishment. A boy who faltered because of fever or cough was scolded, forced to climb anyway, or denied food until he climbed again. Weakness was unacceptable. Every shiver, every cough, every falter in the chimney was a mark against you. In the master's eyes, your suffering proved nothing but your utility. You learned to hide pain, to swallow fear, to climb as though your body were not screaming in protest. And then there were the psychological torments. The constant threat of death, of injury, of being bricked in or forgotten in a chimney weighed on every thought. Boys learned to internalize terror, to carry it silently through each climb. Whispered rumors of children who never returned, of bodies found days later, haunted you constantly. The chimney itself became a sentient predator, watching, waiting, punishing mistakes with ruthless efficiency. Even moments of rest in the cellar were haunted by dread. You listened for the master's approach, for the slap of cane against wood, for the low growl of anger that meant more pain was coming. Shadows moved across the walls, feeding your imagination. Every creak of the building sounded like a warning, every rat squeak a threat. Fear became a constant companion, as present as soot on your skin. Older boys sometimes became agents of punishment as well. Hierarchies formed in the cellar, the older or stronger boys enforcing order among the younger. They were cruel, not out of malice alone, but necessity. If a younger boy faltered, it threatened the entire group. They beat, humiliated, or mocked to ensure survival, their actions echoing the master's cruelty. You learned quickly that trust was fragile, loyalty conditional, and the brotherhood of boys could crack under pressure. Sleep offered no escape. Dreams were haunted by flues too narrow, walls too tight, shadows too deep. You dreamed of falling endlessly, of being trapped in soot-filled tunnels, of faces staring at you from the darkness. Some boys woke screaming, clutching their chests, only to face the same terror the moment they climbed the next morning. Night and day blurred, fear a constant drumbeat in the background of life. The work also brought shame. You were filthy, coughing, bent, your body scarred. Society, when it acknowledged you at all, did so with disgust or superstition. Children from wealthier families ran from you, men and women whispered behind hands, and even strangers who offered kindness did so from pity, not respect. The world was a place that demanded labor from your body, but refused to recognize your humanity. Despair, however, was not absolute. The brotherhood of boys in the cellar persisted, fragile but vital. Whispered encouragement, small gestures of solidarity, even shared scraps of stolen bread, these were lifelines. You learned to find meaning in survival itself, in holding together despite misery, in laughing quietly at small absurdities, in daring to dream even when every day reminded you of death. Mental endurance became as essential as physical strength. You counted steps, memorized routes, rehearsed movements in your head to survive climbs. You learned to manage panic, to focus on the next handhold, the next scrape along brick. You rehearsed every motion, not for joy, but for survival. In this way, your mind became a tool as much as your body. yet despair was never fully banished. Each boy knew it could claim him at any moment. A misstep, a collapse, a rat bite, a fever left untreated, any of these could end life instantly or slowly, leaving you broken, forgotten, or bricked into a chimney. Every cough, every bruise, every stitch of pain was a reminder that life in this profession was a fragile thread. In the midst of this darkness, however, there was resilience. The human spirit, even bruised and beaten, sought light. You clung to small joys, the rare warmth of the sun on a rooftop. A stolen piece of bread, a whispered story in the cellar. These fragments were proof that you were more than labor, more than soot and smoke. They were reminders that, despite the weight of despair, life persisted. Even the master's cruelty could not extinguish hope entirely. Boys found ways to resist silently, to laugh in secret, to protect each other in small ways. A hand on the shoulder, a whispered warning, a shared crumb of food, these acts of rebellion, though minor, preserved dignity and humanity. And so life continued, a brutal oscillation between punishment and fleeting reprieve, terror and fragile hope, suffering and the faint warmth of camaraderie. You endured not because the world valued you, but because you valued survival itself. Each climb, each day, each night in the cellar was a testament to endurance in the face of relentless cruelty. This was the shadow of despair, a constant, gnawing presence, but it was also the crucible in which strength, cunning, and resilience were forged. You learned to climb not only the chimney, but life itself, navigating the hazards of a world that demanded everything and offered almost nothing in return. Even in the shadows of soot and despair, children found ways to resist. Rebellion was never grand. There were no armies of climbing boys rising against masters, but it existed in whispered warnings, stolen scraps, and moments of defiance that reminded both the boys and the world that they were still human. Some acts were simple, almost invisible. A boy might slow his climb deliberately, forcing the master to grumble and lose patience. Not enough to be killed, not enough to ruin the day, but enough to assert control over his own body. Every second gained, every slight delay became a silent victory. In the tight chimneys, even the smallest act of resistance was monumental. Others were cunning. Some boys learned to hide, slipping away from a master's sight, only to return later to continue the work unnoticed. They memorized the schedules of houses, anticipating when the master would be distracted, when patrons would call, when ladders were left unsecured. These tiny evasions allowed moments of respite, and sometimes even small rebellions like refusing to carry a flue brush until the master promised less brutal treatment. Stealing became both necessity and defiance. Boys filched food from kitchens or market stalls, hoarding pieces for themselves or their friends. To survive, they had to outwit not only the master, but the world around them. Every loaf snatched, every apple pocketed, was a rebellion against a system that demanded labor but offered starvation. Words, too, could be weapons. Boys whispered stories that undermined the master's authority, circulating rumors to make him hesitate. Perhaps he feared something he could not see, a curse. The ghosts of those who had perished in chimneys, or perhaps it was simple paranoia that a boy might slip his grasp. Regardless, fear became a tool in the boy's arsenal, a subtle power in an otherwise powerless life. There were moments when physical defiance erupted. A boy might resist a particularly cruel blow, twisting to strike back with a brick or push the master away. Sometimes older boys would intervene, forming a fragile shield of solidarity. These acts were dangerous. The consequences could be brutal. Yet they affirmed the boy's agency, proving that even the smallest could fight, even in the face of overwhelming force. Rebellion also manifested in the imagination. Boys conjured worlds where they were free, where chimneys did not exist, where fire did not threaten life. Sparrow often narrated these stories on rooftops, painting kingdoms of wind and open fields. In their minds, the boys built empires where they ruled, where no master could harm them. These visions were more than comfort. They were defiance against a life meant to crush the spirit. Even in daily routines, rebellion could flourish. Some boys developed small rituals to protect themselves, to outsmart fate. A particular rhythm when climbing, a hidden charm pressed into a pocket, a whispered rhyme. These were gestures asserting control over their own lives. To survive, they had to believe they held some power, however illusory, against the oppressive weight of the world. Sometimes rebellion took on a more communal form. Boys in the same cellar developed silent codes, helping one another navigate dangerous flues, signaling warnings of loose bricks or collapsing sections. They shared knowledge of safer routes, cleverly avoiding injury. They supported each other when beatings came, hiding bruises from the master, nursing wounds, and offering what small comforts they could. This fragile network of solidarity was a rebellion against the isolation the master intended. There were rare, dramatic revolts. In whispered history, stories circulated of boys escaping en masse from a particularly cruel master, racing across rooftops and alleys to vanish into the city's labyrinth. These escapes were fleeting, often temporary, and sometimes tragic, as many were recaptured. Yet they demonstrated the enduring human will to resist, even in circumstances designed to destroy hope. Acts of defiance were not always successful. Punishments for rebellion were brutal longer climbs, heavier loads, harsher beatings. Yet even failures were lessons, teaching boys how to navigate cruelty, how to measure risk, how to assert agency in small ways. Each act, whether successful or not, reinforced the knowledge that they were alive, not merely tools for soot and fire. Humor, too, became rebellion. Boys laughed quietly at absurdities, joked about masters' failings, created nicknames for dangerous chimneys, and shared sly observations about the world above and below. These moments of levity were acts of resistance, a refusal to let despair dominate entirely. To laugh amidst fear was to assert life, to push back against a system built to crush spirit. Even obedience could be subversive. A boy might follow orders exactly, but with exaggerated slowness, forcing the master to reveal his impatience and arrogance. The chimney, once a place of terror, became a stage for small cunning, a venue where brains and agility could challenge brute authority. In these ways, rebellion existed everywhere, in every climb, every cough, every stolen crumb, every whispered story. It was never overt enough to end the system, but it was proof that human spirit cannot be fully extinguished. Each act, each risk, each fleeting moment of freedom was a declaration. We are still here, we endure, we resist. Rebellion ultimately was not about victory but survival. It was a means of asserting humanity in a life that sought to deny it. Through cunning, courage, solidarity, imagination, and defiance, chimney sweeps carved moments of dignity from the harsh landscape of smoke, brick, and suffering. And in those moments, fleeting as they were, the boys became more than tools, more than climbing bodies, more than soot-stained shadows. They became witnesses to their own endurance, survivors writing small, indelible marks against a world determined to erase them. The relationship between a chimney sweep and his master was a complex tangle of fear, dependence, and reluctant respect. It was not friendship far from it, but in the dangerous, smoke-choked world of 19th century chimneys, some strange bonds took shape. Masters ruled with cruelty as their primary tool. A cane or whip could teach obedience, but fear was their currency. One misstep, a moment of hesitation, and a boy could be struck, sometimes severely. Yet over time, a cautious respect developed mutual in its own harsh way. The master respected those who survived climbs, who could navigate narrow flues, who could endure the choke of soot without panic. The boy respected, in a begrudging way, the mastery required to manage such dangerous work. Some masters were relentless monsters. They screamed at mistakes, punished severely, and demanded obedience without pause. Boys who faltered under these masters learned quickly that discretion was survival. You could never fully trust him. Every kind word was suspect. Every rare act of leniency weighed against a lifetime of fear. These masters were terrifying. Yet sometimes their brutality became a perverse kind of consistency predictable in a world otherwise dominated by chaos. Other masters were subtler in cruelty. They used psychological games, whispering threats, spreading rumors among boys, creating rivalries, or pretending favoritism to manipulate behavior. One day you were the master's chosen, climbing first, praised for speed. The next, you were humiliated, punished for imagined laziness, as if the master's mood were as combustible as the chimney fires themselves. These fluctuations demanded constant vigilance, constant calculation, as survival depended on reading subtle cues. Fear shaped every interaction. Boys rarely spoke unless spoken to. Questions were discouraged. Hesitation was punished. A glance at the wrong moment, a stumble, a cough fit, all could ignite wrath. The master's presence was a shadow, his authority absolute, his judgment swift. You learned to anticipate his moods, to move with the rhythm of his voice and gestures, to avoid the flare of anger that could cost life or limb. Yet, despite fear, there were moments when a strange understanding emerged. The master, hardened by trade and reputation, recognized skill. Boys who climbed efficiently, who carried loads without complaint, who navigated dangerous flues with minimal incident earned grudging respect. This respect was not kindness. It was acknowledgement of ability. For the boys, it was rare validation, a reminder that they possessed intelligence, courage, and skill in a world that otherwise reduced them to tools. Some masters, paradoxically, showed moments of unexpected leniency. Perhaps a boy saved a flue from complete blockage, avoided a disaster, or returned safely after an especially harrowing climb. In such moments, a master might allow a rest, share food, or even speak a word of advice. These gestures were fleeting and never repeated enough to be reliable, yet they became treasured memories for boys, proof that even in cruelty, tiny fragments of humanity existed. Boys themselves learned to manipulate this dynamic, however subtly. They discovered which masters could be reasoned with, which ones required silent compliance, which ones responded to cleverness rather than brute submission. Small acts performing a climb faster than expected, hiding minor mistakes. Offering service at just the right moment could tilt the balance, sparing punishment or gaining a crumb of mercy. These negotiations were silent, instinctive, and essential for survival. The psychological tension was exhausting. A boy spent hours, even days, calculating every action, when to speak, when to climb, when to hide emotion. Anxiety became constant. Every decision carried risk. And yet, these calculations were survival strategies, mental armor in a life that demanded total vigilance. Masters were also witnesses to the boys' resilience. Many were impressed, if secretly, by the ability to endure. Some whispered to each other about certain climbing boys who seemed unbreakable, noting how they survived chimney after chimney, day after day. While such recognition never softened the whip or cane, it reinforced a subtle dynamic of mutual reliance. The master needed skilled boys to maintain his business. The boys needed the master's permission to continue earning, even in perilous conditions. Yet the line between respect and cruelty was razor thin. A single error could erase all acknowledgement of skill. A boy who had climbed flawlessly for months could suddenly fall afoul of the master's anger, punished for something trivial or imagined. In this way, fear and respect were intertwined. Inseparable, a continuous tightrope walked on soot-stained lungs and battered hands. Some boys formed secret alliances with masters they judged clever or lenient, exchanging minor obedience for protection, for scraps of food, or for a promise of slightly easier climbs. These relationships were risky. Exposure could mean beatings or being sold to harsher masters. Yet for those who succeeded, the payoff was survival and occasional reprieve, a rare glimpse of safety in an otherwise brutal existence. And then there was the constant reminder the master could be both savior and destroyer. Without him, flues would remain clogged, fires would rage uncontrolled, and the boy's labor would vanish into chaos. He was the embodiment of authority, cruelty, and necessity, an inescapable figure that shaped every breath, every move, every heartbeat. The dynamic between sweep and master encapsulated the paradox of the profession: fear and dependence, cruelty and respect, domination and grudging acknowledgement. Boys learned to navigate this paradox as best they could, improvising survival strategies, relying on cunning, and holding fast to the rare moments of understanding. It was a relationship that demanded constant calculation, courage, and endurance. It was a dance of shadows and threats, power and skill, and it was one of the few truths in a life otherwise ruled by chaos and smoke. In the end, you understood a difficult lesson. The master was both adversary and necessity. To survive, you had to respect him, fear him, and manipulate him in equal measure. And in doing so, you carve space for your own agency, however limited, in a world determined to deny it. Some chimneys were murderers in brick. Narrow, twisting, jagged with soot and ash, they were impossible to navigate without injury or terror. They didn't just carry smoke, they carried the constant risk of death. For a 19th century chimney sweep, certain flues were known by reputation alone: the black serpent, the death pipe, the twist of sorrow. These chimneys were the nightmares whispered about in cellars and taverns alike. The black serpent was notorious. A thin, spiraling shaft winding for 20 feet above a roaring hearth, it was almost impossible to climb. The soot coated the walls like powder, slipping under every handhold. Boys who entered it were swallowed whole, emerging hours later, coughing, bruised, and blackened beyond recognition. Some never emerged at all. The name was earned through countless tragedies. Older boys told stories of bodies wedged tight in the narrow spiral, of screams that echoed in brick, of hopeless struggle against a chimney that seemed to tighten like a living creature. The twist of sorrow was wider, but more deceptive. Its walls shifted in sharp angles, creating blind corners and hidden ledges. One false step, and a boy could fall into a sudden vertical drop. Many stories circulated of children trapped halfway up, dangling by hands or ropes, the soot filling their lungs, their cries unheard except by the walls themselves. It was a chimney that demanded every ounce of skill, courage, and patience. And yet, it had to be cleaned, for a blocked flue meant a roaring fire, smoke-filled rooms, and angry homeowners. Death was not always immediate. Some chimneys led to slow suffocation. In these, boys could become trapped by collapsing soot, by flaking bricks, or by sheer exhaustion. They clawed, scraped, and wriggled, gasping for air as the smoke filled their lungs. Hours could pass in pitch darkness, each breath a battle. Masters sometimes heard the muffled cries, sometimes ignored them. Survival depended entirely on the boys' endurance, ingenuity, and luck. Falls were a constant threat. A misjudged handhold, a slippery brick, or a loose chimney pot could mean plummeting dozens of feet onto cold, hard stone. The sound of a body striking the pavement reverberated through the streets, a grim reminder to those who continued to climb. Even when boys survived, injuries were severe: broken arms, fractured ribs, concussions, and permanent damage were common. Many learned to live with chronic pain, their body's testimony to the dangers they endured daily. The physical danger was compounded by disease. Soot clogged lungs, causing coughs that could turn bloody. Cuts and abrasions became infected, sometimes fatally, in an age before antibiotics. Small injuries could spiral into death. The constant exposure to heat, smoke, and dust weakened the immune system. Boys were fragile in a world that demanded extraordinary endurance. Each climb carried the invisible risk of sickness as surely as it carried the visible threat of bricks and fire. Even experienced boys fell victim to accidents. Sparrow, quick and agile, once became stuck in a narrow flue that twisted like a snake. Hours passed, his body scraping raw against brick, his lungs burning, his hands blistered and bleeding. He survived only because the master, unusually attentive, pulled him free before collapse. The story became legend among the boys, a cautionary tale illustrating the razor-thin line between survival and death. Weather added another layer of danger. Rain turned tiles slippery, snow and ice made rooftop approaches treacherous. Chimneys expanded and contracted with heat, causing cracks or sudden shifts that could trap or crush. Wind could push a boy off balance, send soot into eyes and mouth, or topple a fragile ladder. Nature conspired with architecture, making each climb a trial not only of skill, but of endurance against forces beyond human control. Some chimneys were traps, designed to kill through neglect or poor construction. Old brickwork sometimes crumbled under weight, leaving jagged edges that tore at skin. Narrow chimneys had hidden ledges where boys could become wedged, unable to move forward or backward. The smallest error could cascade into a catastrophe. Climbing was not just labor, it was navigation through a landscape of engineered danger. Yet, in the face of these deadly challenges, boys developed remarkable skill. They memorized every flue they could, noted weak spots, and learned to anticipate shifts in brick or soot. Hands became calloused, eyes sharp, bodies flexible and light. Survival required intimate knowledge of danger, an instinctive sense of risk, and courage bordering on recklessness. Parents and society often remained indifferent. The city needed clean chimneys, warmth in winter, and fire kept from destruction. The deaths and injuries of climbing boys were tragic but tolerated, accepted as the hidden cost of domestic comfort. Some masters argued with grim logic that the children were small enough to fit where adults could not. Risk was intrinsic to the profession, and those who survived were considered fortunate or hardened. For the boys, each deadly chimney was a confrontation with mortality. You felt it in every scrape, every labored breath, every slick handhold. You understood that your body was fragile, that death could strike at any moment, that luck and skill were inseparable. And yet you climbed, you endured, you survived. The deadly chimneys became symbols, etched into memory as tests of courage, endurance, and human will. Each ascent was more than work. It was a negotiation with fate. And for those who survived, each narrow, smoke-filled shaft was a reminder that life, even in its harshest form, was worth the struggle. Amid the darkness of soot-choked flues and the cruelty of masters, friendships became lifelines. They were forged not in comfort but in shared peril, in whispered strategies, in stolen scraps of bread, and in fleeting moments of laughter atop slippery rooftops. For a child sweep, companionship was survival as much as solace. Some friendships formed instantly, born from necessity. Boys paired off to navigate particularly narrow chimneys, guiding one another through twisting shafts and alerting each other to unstable bricks. Trust was essential. A misstep could mean the difference between life and death. A hand grasped in the dark could steady, pull, or lift. In these dangerous moments, camaraderie was absolute, unspoken, yet unbreakable. Other bonds grew slowly, tempered by shared suffering. Days spent in the cellar, huddled against cold stone, offered time for whispers, for storytelling, for small games that mocked the master's cruelty. Boys learned each other's fears and strengths, weaving a web of understanding that shielded them from isolation. Names became Sacred Red, Sparrow, Thomas, each representing skill, loyalty, and courage. To betray a friend was to betray one's own chance of survival. Friendships also carried practical benefits. Older boys mentored younger ones, teaching them how to navigate flues, avoid injury, and anticipate the master's whims. In return, younger boys offered nimble agility, small hands capable of reaching spots too tight for older bodies. Mutual dependence created a fragile ecosystem of survival, where each boy's life contributed to the safety and endurance of the others. Humor was often a glue in these relationships. In the midst of suffering, boys found ways to laugh quietly, telling stories that exaggerated dangers or made light of pain. A witty remark, a playful shove, a shared glance in the master's absence. These acts were defiance, bonding, and relief all at once. Laughter reminded boys that they were still human, that the soul could endure even when the body was battered. Sometimes friendships extended beyond immediate survival. Boys watched each other, hiding injuries or offering stolen food. If one fell ill, others shared warmth and comfort, taking turns to ensure no one was left alone. These gestures, small as they seemed, were revolutionary in a world designed to isolate and punish. They were acts of kindness and rebellion intertwined, threads of humanity against the backdrop of cruelty. Rooftops offered another dimension to friendship. Away from the cellar and the master, boys became explorers together, sharing fleeting freedom above the smoke. They raced across tiles, daring each other to daring leaps, shared stories of imagined escapes, and reveled in the rare taste of wind on skin. On these heights, the bond of friendship was strengthened, as boys relied on each other to navigate the treacherous paths and to ensure everyone survived. Friendship also carried emotional support. The knowledge that someone else understood fear, hunger, and pain was comforting. Boys whispered secrets, shared dreams, and offered hope in a world that gave little. A hand on the shoulder, a reassuring nod, a whispered, "We'll survive this." These small acts kept despair at bay, creating a network of resilience amid relentless oppression. Some friendships were tested under extreme pressure. Climbing a chimney together, one boy might falter, placing both in danger. In such moments, courage and loyalty were measured. Boys learned who could be trusted, who would prioritize self-preservation, and who would risk everything for a friend. Survival often depended on these choices, and the lessons learned were indelible. Even death did not sever these bonds. When a boy perished in a flu or succumbed to sickness, the memory lingered. Friends carried the stories of their courage, whispering them to the others as warnings, inspiration, and honor. Each life lost became a reminder of fragility, but also of the strength found in companionship. The master often underestimated these relationships. He assumed isolation would breed compliance. He did not realize that friendships were shields, strategies, and sources of quiet defiance. Boys who bonded in darkness, who shared resources and knowledge, were harder to control. They whispered secrets, plotted small evasions, and found ways to support each other even under scrutiny. Solidarity became a subtle rebellion against oppression. Friendship extended beyond immediate peers. Boys shared knowledge of safe routes, of houses with kinder masters, of rooftops where danger was less severe. This collective wisdom circulated quietly, becoming a survival network spanning streets and alleys, chimneys and cellars. Each boy contributed to the group, ensuring that knowledge, skill, and courage persisted. In the rarest cases, friendships became alliances that challenged masters directly. Boys coordinated subtle rebellions, creating distractions, hiding small tools, or delaying climbs to frustrate the master's control. While these efforts were modest, they demonstrated the latent power of solidarity, the ability of the weakest to influence the powerful, if only briefly and subtly. Above all, friendships were emotional anchors. Amid fear, hunger, and pain, knowing that someone shared your experience, understood your suffering, and could offer support made life bearable. These bonds became the invisible armor of childhood in a world designed to strip away humanity. In soot and shadow, among smoke-choked flues and cruel masters, friendships endured. They were whispers in the dark, hands clasped for support, laughter shared on rooftops, and stories passed in cellars. They were acts of courage, defiance, and survival, proving that even in the harshest conditions, the human heart could cling to hope, to loyalty, and to love. And for a boy climbing through the death tunnels of London, friendship was more than comfort, it was life itself. While chimneys were prisons above, the streets of London formed a different kind of labyrinth below. Narrow alleys, crowded markets, and shadowed corners became playgrounds, workplaces, and hunting grounds for survival. For a chimney sweep, life did not end when your climb finished. The city itself was a constant test of wit, agility, and awareness. The streets were filled with other children, many homeless or orphaned, scraping existence from crumbs, coin, or kindness. They were pickpockets, newsboys, and street performers. You quickly learned who could be trusted, who could be swindled, and who would defend you in a fight. Alliances formed naturally, sometimes lasting for years, sometimes dissolving in a single act of betrayal. Each encounter was a negotiation, balancing survival against the risk of exploitation. Boys like you often relied on these networks for intelligence. Which streets were dangerous? Which houses had kind patrons who might leave scraps or coins? Where did city constables patrol, and which alleys offered escape? The city itself was a map of hazards and opportunities, and older urchins passed knowledge to younger ones, creating a fragile but essential system of survival. Food was scarce and ingenuity was essential. Baked goods stolen from markets, scraps salvaged from taverns, or coins earned through tricks and petty theft were lifelines. Every meal was hard-won, and sharing with friends became a necessity rather than a choice. The street was as much a battlefield as the chimneys. Hunger sharpened both wit and desperation. Street life also offered lessons in negotiation and cunning. A chimney sweep, soiled and small, could pass unnoticed, slipping past adults and authorities. You learned how to blend into crowds, hide evidence of mischief, and anticipate the reactions of merchants, constables, and rival children. Survival depended on intelligence, quick thinking, and sometimes audacity bordering on recklessness. Violence was ever present. Fights between street children were common, disputes over territory, food, or respect escalating quickly. Even a small boy could be forced to defend himself against larger rivals. Every punch, shove, or kick was a test of agility and endurance. Boys adapted, learning to anticipate attacks, to escape quickly, and to form alliances for protection. In many ways, street survival mirrored the dangers of the chimney. Every step could be deadly. Yet, amid danger, the streets also offered freedom. Unlike the claustrophobic chimneys, the alleys and rooftops connected to them allowed exploration, imagination, and fleeting moments of autonomy. Boys could run, climb walls, and escape the watchful eyes of masters. These moments were intoxicating, rare glimpses of childhood, unspoiled by the whip, soot, and smoke. The city had its own rhythms, and sweeps quickly learned them. Market days brought opportunity, as distracted adults left unattended food and coins. Festivals offered chances to beg or perform. Even the flow of the Thames mattered. Boats, docks, and river paths provided escape routes, hiding places, and alternative sources of livelihood. The city itself became both ally and adversary, teaching boys the art of adaptation. Other marginalized children became companions and collaborators. Street performers shared tricks and tips. Beggars offered guidance on routes and hazards. Runaway apprentices offered insight into evading authorities. These networks were informal but critical. They provided not only survival skills but also emotional support, friendship, and guidance through a harsh world. The city also offered education of a strange sort. Boys observed patterns, how merchants reacted to scarcity, how constables enforced rules, how the wealthy avoided danger. They learned basic arithmetic in markets, geography through streets and alleys, and social dynamics in the crowded thoroughfares. Knowledge became a tool as crucial as strength, agility, or climbing skill. Danger persisted, however. Constables could arrest you, adults could punish you, and rival gangs could attack. Fires occasionally swept through narrow streets, creating chaos that claimed belongings or lives. Even minor accidents, falling from walls, slipping on cobblestones, or misjudging a corner could result in injury or exposure. The streets were never safe, merely navigable for those quick enough and cunning enough to survive. Some sweeps became minor legends among street networks, known for daring escapes, clever thefts, or endurance in chimney climbs. These reputations were double-edged, respect earned, but also envy and rivalry. Boys learned to navigate reputation carefully, cultivating allies and avoiding unnecessary attention. Despite danger, street life fostered imagination and dreams. Boys envisioned escape routes, plotted adventures, and created stories of life beyond London. The alleyways, rooftops, and hidden corners became stages for imaginary kingdoms, daring feats, and fleeting freedom. These fantasies sustained hope and bolstered courage, reminding boys that life could exist beyond soot and smoke. The city taught adaptation and resilience. Every interaction, every observation, every narrow escape was training for survival. You became attuned to danger, resourceful in adversity, and connected to a network of peers who, like you, endured invisibly in the margins of society. Above all, the streets reminded you that survival depended not solely on individual skill but on connection, observation, and cunning. Every alley held opportunity, every shadow a threat, and every friendship a chance to endure another day. For the chimney sweep, the city below was as vital as the chimney above, a hidden world that required intelligence, courage, and humanity to navigate. Even amid soot, fear, and relentless labor, moments existed when a boy could glimpse the world beyond the smoke. These fleeting instances, rare, fragile, and fleeting, offered more than beauty. They were reminders that life extended beyond chimneys, cellars, and alleys. Rooftops, though perilous, provided views few other children could ever imagine. From the tiles of London, boys saw the river glinting in the sun, the domes of distant churches, and streets bustling with activity. For a moment, the smoke and grime faded into the background, replaced by light and perspective. These moments were stolen, brief, yet unforgettable. A glance at the horizon reminded a boy that the city was vast, full of life, and that he was a participant rather than merely a victim. Seasonal changes transformed even the bleakest surroundings. In winter, frost could lace rooftops with a brittle beauty, and the rising sun painted chimney stacks in gold. Spring brought the smell of wet earth and blooming gardens, teasing children with warmth, color, and a hint of normalcy. Summer offered long days, the chance to climb higher, to linger, to feel the wind. Each season carried subtle lessons, a rhythm beyond the daily struggle, a reminder that life had cycles beyond hardship. The rare act of a city festival, parade, or market fair could momentarily lift the veil of toil. The noise, the colors, and the movement of people drew curiosity and wonder. Boys, soot-stained and ragged, could watch the world's vibrancy from the shadows, absorbing sights, sounds, and smells that contrasted starkly with their grim reality. These glimpses ignited dreams of a life beyond chimney climbs and cellar shadows. Small, natural moments were treasured. Rain on rooftops could sparkle like jewels. Birds perched on chimneys offered companionship, and stray sunlight illuminated walls with warmth. A rat darting through the alley might seem trivial, yet even such ordinary events punctuated the monotony of labor with wonder. Boys learned to notice these details, letting them anchor the mind when soot and fear threatened to overwhelm. Sometimes a boy caught the eye of a stranger, a merchant, or a passerby who offered food, a kind word, or a moment of recognition. These interactions were brief, easily overlooked by the adult world, but profoundly meaningful. They whispered the possibility of compassion, a bridge to life beyond the oppressive routine, and validation that one's existence was acknowledged. Dreams, both waking and sleeping, carried boys beyond their immediate circumstances. While lying in cold cellars at night, hands stiff, backs aching, boys imagined other lives running in fields, learning trades, joining families, or simply playing without fear. Dreams were both refuge and rebellion, mental escapes from a body trapped by labor and danger. They were private acts of resistance against a system designed to crush imagination and hope. The body occasionally offered moments of respite. After a climb, lying on a rooftop with the sun warming your soot-stained skin, breathing clean air for the first time in hours, could feel like freedom. These were rare, fleeting moments, but in them, boys rediscovered physical sensation beyond pain and exhaustion. Hands and feet tingled with warmth and life, and hearts felt the thrill of being more than instruments of labor. Friendship amplified these glimpses. Sharing a view from a rooftop, laughing at daring leaps, pointing out distant landmarks, and imagining distant lands forged shared experiences. Even brief exchanges of observation, look at the river, or that spire is taller than ours, brought meaning, reminding boys that the world was larger than soot, smoke, and survival. Education in informal form also emerged. Observing rooftops and streets taught spatial awareness, geography, and architectural understanding. Boys memorized the layout of districts, the locations of dangerous buildings, and shortcuts to safety. Curiosity, often instinctive, became a tool as vital as skill or agility. These glimpses beyond the smoke shaped both survival and understanding of the world. Occasionally, boys glimpsed wealth and comfort, sometimes sparking envy, sometimes aspirations. Mansions with polished windows, gardens, and servants contrasted sharply with soot-filled houses. The stark disparities were poignant, highlighting the injustice and the allure of a different life. While rare, these glimpses inspired dreams of escape or self-improvement, fueling ambitions that might otherwise be buried beneath labor and despair. Religious structures offered a different kind of view. From a cathedral rooftop, boys could see spires and stained glass catching sunlight, symbols of hope and permanence. Even a fleeting moment in such a sacred space could be grounding, a reminder that human achievement and faith persisted beyond suffering. It was as if the world had corners untouched by cruelty, where beauty endured despite hardship. Nature's small interventions became symbolic refuges. A stray bird nesting on a chimney, wind-moving clouds across rooftops, or the sound of a distant bell reminded boys of life beyond labor. These observations, though subtle, cultivated awareness, mindfulness, and a capacity for wonder. They were gentle defiance proof that the world held experiences not governed by fear or toil. These moments also offered time for reflection. Boys thought about family, whether lost or distant, and imagined what life might have been under different circumstances. They questioned the system, the fairness of society, and the cruelty embedded in daily existence. Reflection fostered both resilience and imagination, a private space to process trauma and envision possibility. Even in danger, glimpses beyond the smoke were grounding. Seeing a bird, hearing laughter in the streets below, Feeling sun on a back stiff from climbing, these moments reaffirmed life itself. They were reminders that each breath mattered, that endurance was not merely mechanical, and that hope, however fragile, was tangible. In the daily grind of chimney sweeps, glimpses beyond smoke were tiny beacons. They reminded boys that while soot and fear shaped much of life, the world offered light, beauty, and possibility. These moments sustained courage, nurtured imagination, and allowed a boy to endure, dreaming of more than survival, dreaming of life beyond chimneys. Life as a chimney sweep was not only a battle against brick and soot, but also a relentless struggle against the forces of nature. Rain, wind, frost, and heat turned already dangerous rooftops and chimneys into treacherous arenas, each day a test of endurance, skill, and luck. Rain was an ever-present threat. Water seeped into brickwork, softening mortar and creating slick surfaces. Tiles, already unstable in places, became death traps underfoot. A misstep on a wet rooftop could mean plunging several stories to stone below, or being trapped in a narrow, waterlogged flue with no purchase for hands or feet. Even light drizzle blurred vision and dulled reflexes, demanding constant focus and precision. Winter brought frost, ice, and bitter cold. Fingers stiffened, numb with cold, struggled to grasp bricks or ropes. Breath became mist, then frost, coating the inside of chimneys, making every climb a battle against hypothermia. Roofs iced over, ladders froze, and the slightest stumble could end in catastrophe. Even experienced boys could falter under winter's assault, the cold making each step and each hold precarious. Snow, deceptively beautiful, transformed the city into a mirror of danger. It hid weak spots on roofs, masked unstable tiles, and made slippery surfaces treacherous. Chimneys could be clogged by snow, forcing boys to clear both ice and soot simultaneously. Cold and exhaustion combined, weakening muscles and dulling reflexes, turning a routine climb into a life-threatening challenge. Summer, though seemingly easier, brought its own hazards. Intense heat in narrow chimneys caused suffocation, dizziness, and exhaustion. Smoke combined with sweltering temperatures, making each ascent unbearable. Sun beating down on rooftops could cause burns or dehydration. Even a simple climb became an ordeal of endurance, demanding constant awareness of body limits, air quality, and timing. Wind was an unpredictable enemy. Gusts could unbalance a boy on a rooftop, knock loose tiles, or push against a body wedged in a narrow flue. Chimney pots could rattle and shift, threatening to crush hands or heads. The wind's force was amplified at height, creating an invisible but deadly challenge. Every gust required calculation, every breath demanded caution. Storms intensified danger exponentially. Thunder and lightning added auditory chaos and fear, obscuring the sounds of cracking brick or shifting tiles. Rain mixed with wind created sheets of water that rushed across rooftops, washing away balance and increasing the likelihood of falls. Chimney flues could flood unexpectedly, turning narrow shafts into vertical water chutes. Survival demanded both skill and instinct, a delicate negotiation with forces beyond control. Seasonal hazards were cumulative. Frost followed rain, creating slick surfaces. Sun and heat baked bricks, causing cracks that loosened unexpectedly. Even minor weather shifts required adaptation. Boys learned to read the sky, sense shifts in wind, and anticipate changing conditions on rooftops. Survival depended not only on climbing skill, but on acute observation of nature itself. Cold nights in cellars amplified the effects of weather. Frost seeped through cracks, damp air chilled bones, and sickness spread among boys weakened by exposure. A chimney sweep's life extended beyond climbs. Winter's bite lingered, reducing strength and resilience for the next day. Exposure was a constant threat, with minor discomforts quickly becoming life-threatening. Some boys developed adaptive strategies. Rags wrapped around hands, scarves over noses, and improvised gloves helped resist cold and soot. Shallow footholds were memorized to navigate slippery tiles, and routes were chosen to avoid the most exposed positions. Adaptation became instinctive. Life demanded improvisation and resilience against both architecture and the natural world. Rain, wind, frost, and heat were relentless teachers. Each climb required calculation: how to brace, when to move, how to breathe. Mistakes could be fatal, and survival depended on learning quickly. Nature was indifferent, harsh, and unforgiving, demanding both respect and constant vigilance. Even the smallest details mattered. A sudden shower could drench a rope, weakening it. Frost could coat a brick, making it impossible to grip. Heat could cause dizzying vertigo in narrow shafts. Boys learned to anticipate these hazards, adjusting speed, grip, and technique. Every climb became a negotiation between human strength and natural forces. Seasons also shaped routine. Winter climbs were faster, less frequent, and often more brutal, while summer allowed longer ascents but increased risk of suffocation and heat stroke. The calendar dictated not only survival strategy but also physical adaptation. Boys grew attuned to the rhythms of weather, linking endurance to environmental awareness. Despite constant danger, nature offered rare rewards. Sunlight on rooftops, glimpses of rivers, and the sound of birds provided fleeting comfort and beauty. These moments reminded boys that beyond labor and hazard, the world contained life, color, and wonder. Even amidst fear, these glimpses nurtured imagination, hope, and resilience. The combination of architecture and weather made the life of a chimney sweep a daily gamble. Bricks and soot were lethal alone. Combined with rain, frost, heat, or wind, they became instruments of near-constant peril. Yet boys endured, they climbed, adapted, and survived. Each day was both trial and testament, a demonstration of human resilience against the twin threats of man and nature. In essence, nature's cruelty was an inseparable part of the chimney sweep's existence. Every element, from rain to frost to heat, shaped the rhythm of labor, the hazards of ascent, and the strategies for survival. Endurance required physical skill, mental acuity, and emotional fortitude. Each climb was a negotiation not only with brick and soot, but with the weather itself. For a boy navigating the chimneys of London, survival depended as much on reading the sky, feeling the wind, and sensing frost as on grip, strength, or agility. Nature was a relentless adversary, indifferent to life or death, and mastery over its hazards became part of the craft, part of the peril, and part of the story of survival amidst smoke, stone, and cruelty. The life of a chimney sweep left marks far deeper than soot-stained skin. Every climb, every scrape, every inhalation of smoke etched itself onto the body and mind, leaving a legacy of pain, endurance, and trauma that would persist long after the last flue had been cleaned. Physical scars were the most obvious. Hands bore calluses and open sores from gripping rough bricks. Fingers were often twisted or broken from misjudged handholds. Arms and shoulders carried permanent bruises or dislocations from falls, while backs and legs ached from climbing, lifting, and contorting in narrow chimneys. Chronic pain became a companion, reminding boys daily of their labor and the dangers endured. Lungs bore the invisible, lasting marks of soot inhalation. Blackened lungs, persistent coughs, and respiratory illnesses were common among former sweeps. Even after leaving the profession, breathing remained a struggle, and the constant exposure to smoke left bodies weakened, prone to infection, and more vulnerable to disease. The lungs told a story no words could fully capture, a story of danger, endurance, and the price of survival. Trauma extended beyond the body. The constant fear of masters, the threat of injury, and the awareness of mortality created a mental landscape dominated by vigilance, anxiety, and hyper-awareness. Many boys developed acute instincts for danger, a double-edged sword that preserved life but haunted thought. Sleep was often disturbed by memories of narrow flues, close calls, or the cries of fellow children lost to misfortune. Social development was affected as well. Isolation, secrecy, and mistrust of adults shaped relationships. Many boys learned to rely solely on peers, forming tight bonds that could be both protective and limiting. Trust was hard-earned and easily broken, shaping personalities and social skills long into adulthood. The world outside soot-filled chimneys often seemed incomprehensible, overwhelming, or threatening. Psychological scars were subtle but pervasive. Memories of cruelty, near-death experiences, and the unpredictability of masters lingered. Anxiety and fear became habitual, a constant background hum. Some boys developed resilience and cunning, skills forged under duress, while others carried a sense of vulnerability, hypersensitivity, or mistrust. Childhood was compressed, accelerated, and interrupted by labor, danger, and responsibility far beyond years. Loss was ever present. Friends perished in flus, succumbed to disease, or disappeared from the streets. Each loss compounded the emotional weight of labor, teaching early lessons in mortality, grief, and detachment. Boys learned to endure sorrow silently, to suppress grief for survival, and to continue working despite pain or loss. Emotional repression became adaptive, necessary, but leaving deep, lasting effects. Education, formal or informal, was fragmented. Some boys learned literacy, counting, and observation through necessity or mentorship, but many missed foundational schooling entirely. The world of work replaced the world of books. Knowledge became practical, tactical, and survival-oriented, shaping intellect but leaving gaps in culture, language, and future opportunities. These missing pieces shaped trajectories long after youth ended. Physical development was accelerated and distorted by labor. Small bodies were forced to stretch, contort, and endure unnatural positions for hours each day. Muscles developed in asymmetrical patterns, joints suffered premature wear, and growth could be stunted or uneven. The body itself became a map of labor, visible in posture, scars, and the hardened hands and limbs of those who survived. Some sweeps carried shame alongside scars. Stains on clothing, blackened faces, and soot-covered hair marked them as workers, children, and survivors. Society's gaze was not kind. Adult peers and strangers judged them as poor, dirty, and expendable. Even after leaving chimney work, this stigma lingered, affecting social standing, employment prospects, and self-perception. The legacy of childhood labor shaped morality and perception. Boys learned to navigate harsh hierarchies, to assess risk, to manipulate outcomes, and to negotiate power. These skills, forged in brutality, were survival tools but also carried ethical ambiguity. Adaptation often required deception, self-interest, and cunning, traits that persisted into adulthood, sometimes clashing with societal norms. Memories of fear, death, and survival became stories passed silently, whispered to younger sweeps or carried inward as personal mythology. Some learned to find meaning in endurance, framing suffering as proof of courage. Others struggled with haunting recollections, a reminder that childhood had been stolen, replaced with labor, fear, and constant threat. Long-term effects included health complications beyond lungs and joints. Soot exposure caused skin conditions, eye damage, and digestive issues. Injuries healed imperfectly, leaving chronic pain or disability. Exposure to extreme temperatures and poor nutrition weakened immune systems. These physical remnants intertwined with mental scars, creating a body and mind constantly aware of vulnerability. Yet some sweeps carried resilience as well. Survival under extreme duress built problem-solving skills, courage, and independence. Bonds formed in childhood continued to offer social support. Experience with danger created calculated risk-taking abilities and a profound understanding of human cruelty and kindness alike. Life as a sweep was brutal, but it also forged extraordinary endurance. The legacy of chimney work was inseparable from memory. Even years later, men recalled flus, rooftops, masters, and friends lost. Soot-stained hands and lungs remained as proof, bodies and minds as living testimonies to what had been endured. Childhood, once imagined as free and protected, had been compressed into a crucible of smoke, stone, fear, and fleeting hope. Survival was a triumph, but survival carried cost. Scars visible and invisible remained. The body bore evidence of labor and danger. The mind carried the echoes of terror and loss. Yet these scars also told of courage, resilience, and the capacity of children to endure horrors unimaginable to most. Life as a chimney sweep was brutal, unrelenting, and formative, leaving marks that would shape every future step, breath, and decision. For those who survived, these scars became both burden and badge, a reminder of childhood spent in soot and stone, of the precarious dance between life and death, and of the extraordinary capacity of human endurance under conditions that would break most adults. Life as a chimney sweep was a story of survival written in soot, stone, and fire. Some children endured and carried the marks of labor into adulthood, while others were swallowed by chimneys, disease, or the streets. The final chapter of this existence is not just about death or survival, it is about the legacy of a generation forged in danger, the indifference of society, and the extraordinary resilience of children who lived where few could. Many sweeps never saw adulthood. A fall, suffocation, or the slow deterioration of lungs claimed countless boys before they reached 20. Yet those who survived carried with them both physical and emotional proof of endurance. Each scar, each chronic ache, each lingering cough was evidence of having navigated a childhood few could imagine. To survive was to bear the weight of memory, of terror endured, and of friends lost in silent flues. Society largely ignored this suffering. Families, desperate for income, handed over their children. Masters demanded labor with minimal concern for safety. Wealthy households expected clean chimneys for warmth and safety, oblivious or indifferent to the human cost. Death, injury, and suffering were collateral damage in a system built for comfort, efficiency, and profit. Only later, through reform movements and public outcry, did awareness grow, but for the boys themselves, recognition often came too late. Those who survived became witnesses to an invisible history. They carried stories of flues that twisted like serpents, rooftops slippery with frost, and chimneys that threatened death at every turn. These stories were sometimes whispered in corners, sometimes shared with younger sweeps, forming a chain of memory and survival. Through oral history, the danger, cunning, and courage of chimney sweeps persisted even as brick, soot, and rope faded from their lives. Physical survival often came at great cost. Bones weakened, joints ached, lungs bore soot and scarring, and hands remained calloused and deformed. Many sweeps were forced into labor for the rest of their lives, their bodies shaped by the crucible of childhood. Yet these same bodies demonstrated resilience, the capacity to endure extremes of heat, cold, exhaustion, and fear that would defeat most adults. Survival was not merely persistence, it was extraordinary adaptation. Mental survival required even greater skill. Trauma, grief, and constant exposure to mortality left invisible scars. Yet the children who endured developed acute awareness, resourcefulness, and an intimate understanding of danger. They learned early how to read people, anticipate hazards, and make split-second decisions that determined life or death. These lessons, harsh as they were, became tools for future survival in a world that remained harsh and unyielding. Friendship, loyalty, and solidarity left enduring marks as well. Bonds formed in darkness, soot, and fear endured long after the final climb. Relationships that saved lives in the chimney or on rooftops shaped moral understanding, emotional resilience, and the capacity for empathy. Survivors often carried these friendships into adulthood, proof that even in cruelty, humanity persisted. The legacy of chimney sweeps also influenced social awareness. Reformers eventually highlighted the cruelty inflicted on children, leading to legislation and public scrutiny. Though many survivors were already scarred, their experiences became testimony that reshaped perceptions, ignited campaigns for child labor laws, and influenced future generations. The invisible struggle of children in chimneys became a catalyst for social change, even if delayed. Yet memory was complex. Survivors wrestled with both pride and grief. Pride in endurance, in navigating lethal flues, in outlasting adversity. Grief for lost friends, the innocence stolen, and the lifelong consequences of childhood labor. Memory became both a burden and a testament, shaping identity, behavior, and perspective long after childhood ended. Some survivors channeled experience into craft, using knowledge of rooftops, architecture, and hazard navigation to gain employment in construction, maintenance, or repair. Others struggled, trapped by physical limitations, chronic illness, or societal marginalization. Survival did not guarantee prosperity, comfort, or recognition. It guaranteed only existence, often a fragile and painful one. The legacy also lived in the city itself. Chimneys that once demanded children's labor gradually disappeared, replaced by modern heating systems. Rooftops remained, silent witnesses to a time when children climbed to near certain death. Yet the city's memory of these children was fleeting. Only written records, reform accounts, and survivor stories kept the history alive. The children's experiences, once invisible, became part of a larger narrative of industrialization, urban labor, and childhood endurance. cultural memory preserved some aspects. Stories, poems, and later historical accounts recounted the perils faced by chimney sweeps. Artists depicted soot-stained faces and frail bodies climbing into darkness. Literature immortalized the tension between innocence and labor, danger and courage, childhood and exploitation. In these ways, survival extended beyond the physical into art, memory, and social consciousness. The final lesson of life as a chimney sweep was both sobering and inspiring. Childhood was not guaranteed to be safe or protected. Survival depended on courage, skill, solidarity, and adaptation. The children who endured demonstrated the extraordinary capacity of the human spirit to navigate danger, endure suffering, and maintain a sense of self and hope even in the most oppressive circumstances. For those climbing flues in London, life was immediate, perilous, and intense. Yet the story did not end at the final chimney. It extended into adulthood, into memory, into social change, and into the city itself. Chimney sweeps were both victims and witnesses, sufferers and educators. Forgotten by society, yet essential to its warmth and function. Their lives were tragic, but their endurance was heroic. In the end, survival was the ultimate testament. Every scar, every cough, every ache told a story of courage. Every memory preserved the reality of a childhood stolen by necessity and indifference. The legacy of chimney sweeps endures in the history of labor, in the evolution of childhood rights, and in the remarkable resilience of human beings confronted with unimaginable hardship. The children who climbed, slipped, choked, and persevered remain silent heroes, their stories etched in soot, whispered in shadows, and remembered in the annals of social conscience. Survival was not victory, but it was defiance, a living testimony that even the smallest, weakest, and most oppressed could endure, witness, and persist in a world indifferent to their suffering.